So, I am Martin. I work at the Fine Art Group in the Art Advisory team.
And hi, I'm Shuchi, and I work for Individual Art Advisor as well.
So we decided to do a podcast about artists we want to learn about more. The idea is basically this. I read a biography, Shuchi reads a biography and various exhibition catalogues, and then we present the artist and form an opinion as to what we deem to be their most important work. So Edvard Munch, two reasons we chose him. First of all, there were a lot of shows recently at Barberini in Berlin, for instance, and many contemporary artists, Tracy Emin and what have you, also I think are to a certain extent inspired by his, very emotionally charged, expressive form of painting.
I mean, Tracy Emin definitely loves Munch. It is her god, basically.
Huh. So, how about you? Why don't you just start with his biography, just running us through, who the hell is Munch?
So I'll just give everyone a short introduction to Edvard Munch and a short biography of where his life began and where his life ends. So Edvard Munch was born in 1863. In his early years, he mostly lived in Oslo, in Norway. Munch's father his name was Christian Munch. He was a doctor and a very religious man. As a result, the family was also very religious. And back then, apparently, doctor salary was not good. The family was never wealthy, so there was always very limited resource to Munch since childhood. There were 5 children in the family, so it was relatively large family with little income. However, the larger Munch family was actually quite well off and rather noble in Norway. For example, Johann Storm Munch, who was Munch's grandfather, was one of the founding members of the National Gallery in Oslo, interestingly. And Jakob Munch, who was a relative to Munch, he was actually the student of Jacques-Louis David.
Who's that?
One of the most famous neoclassical painters in France.
Okay.
So Jacob sort of brought in the neoclassical portraits and things like that.
Was a quite artistic family.
Yeah, it was a quite artistic family, surprisingly, already. And also there's Peter Andreas Munch, who was known as P.A. Munch, who was his uncle. Mm-hmm. And he was a really important historian to creating the national identity and history of Norway. So the whole family was already very cultured and artistic, but Munch's father was like this poor doctor, kind of an odd one out in the family as well.
Yeah, but that's interesting.
I feel like that's a kind of background that people don't really think about when you think of Munch, because he's just super famous.
Particularly because he's so unconventional and, paints... we'll get to that, but he never went to university in a very formalistic sense, at least, and his painting style it's very raw.
Yes.
So.
Yes, he was the odd one out of his very religious and studious family, and his whole family was kind of an odd one out of the larger family as well. And in the very early years, actually, Munch's already experienced death quite a few times in his childhood, and that has formed an important part of his experience in early childhood. His mother, Laura, died of illness when Munch was only 5 years old, and later his aunt Karen, who was Laura's sister, took over the motherly role in the family and joined the household. His aunt Karen never married Christian. They were always very separate. She was just the mother figure who was always there for Munch and supported him all the way through his adult life when he was really financially very, very difficult, even though the family was still always in financial troubles. And later in the years, his sister Sophie would die also very young, when she was 15, and his younger brother Andreas also died when he was only 30, and the younger brother was supposedly this much stronger, much fitter young man who became a doctor and went to medical school and everything. But in the end, somehow many of the health issues and mental issues came into the family, and for Munch that was a very important factor in his life and his thinking of what life is, because illness and death just always surrounded him ever since childhood. And Munch himself obviously also had a very frail health, and he's always been ill since young, and the Norwegian winters are also very harsh, and it had not been nice to Munch as a kid. He came close to death quite a few times as a kid, who was really ill and always in bed, and that was one of the reasons that he couldn't continue studying, because he just missed too many lessons and he couldn't continue his scholarship, and his family couldn't support him to go to art schools, basically. However, art and painting was an important part of his life since he was young, and when he was 17, he wrote in his diary that it is my decision now to become a painter. So that has always 17. Been his 17.
Which year was that? I mean, he was born in 63, you said.
Yes.
So it would have been 1880.
Yeah, something
interesting.
Like that.
Okay.
1880. Yes. So yeah, that has always been his aspiration. And so he joined the Royal School of Art and Design in Oslo in 1880, and since then he's formed a group of friends in Oslo at the time who were these bohemians, young people who were artists, painters, sculptors, and writers and poets, and they were also a very important part of his source of inspiration at the time for his art and his thinking, but also was really foundational to his future thinking. He has a couple of philosopher friends who has brought him to read Nietzsche and all these literature that he will continue to read for the rest of his life. And then the turning point comes in 1889, when he had his first long stay in Paris. He took a scholarship and had a whole year in Paris to study with this quite conservative painter, but which he soon quit.
1889, interesting.
Yes.
Because that's already, a phase when, I mean, 1889, I strongly associate that with the Pointillist painters. I think Seurat died in 1888, if I...
Yeah.
No, or was it 1892? Well, roughly around that time. So you did have a lot of innovative voices in Paris.
Yeah, so it was a great experience for him, and he saw all of this Pointillism and Cézanne and Gauguin and everything, and he had full-on experience, which is probably why he also really just quit school. And he did have a Pointillist period as well, very briefly, I think, around the time. Yeah. But he quit school anyway. And that year in November, his father, Dr. Munch, also died after a stroke. And Munch was at the time still in Paris, so it was kind of the last time he's ever seen his father before he left for Paris.
Must have been a difficult time. So both parents de facto gone. He still has his aunt, and he's in Paris.
Yes.
He drops out of school. So what does he live off?
He has absolutely no money. So he was on a scholarship. So after he dropped out of school, obviously there's no scholarship.
Sure.
And so he had to move to this suburb that's called St. Cloud around Paris. Uh-huh. And there he just drank a lot and had a lot of smoke and all sorts of other substances, and lived alone, very, very just...
Reclusive,
Yes, very not social. And... He thought a lot about art, and he came up with this manifesto in 1890, which we call the St. Cloud Manifesto.
Okay.
But we will come to that later.
Okay.
Yes. And then in 1892, Munch was invited to exhibit his pictures at the Association of Berlin Artists in Berlin. And that was very exciting for Munch. It was one of the first exhibitions that he had that's outside of Oslo. And he was really hoping that there's this group of people in Berlin who would really appreciate his art because he was invited to show there, obviously.
Why did they invite him? I mean,
I think there was a group of people who kind of appreciated his art, like heard of it. I mean, obviously there's a lot of Norwegians in Berlin.
And what was his art like at the time? I mean, how...
It's pretty much what we know Munch for, it's kind of the precursor, but like pretty much there.
Yeah.
And the exhibition had a huge publicity because there was such polarizing opinions about it. And actually, at the end, only after 1 week, the show was shut down.
Okay. And what was polarizing? I mean, what I would think is, firstly, the non-idealized depictions of persons, I think a famous motive is obviously the ill girl in the bed.
I mean, I think it's the same reason why he was...
the style, perhaps, that it's quite naive and rough in some sense.
The style, but also I think the same reasons why he was unpopular in Oslo is also the subject matters. Is like sometimes it's like people kissing and like it's just not very like ideal woman type of thing. It's and yes, but actually Munch didn't find it too depressing. And he wrote to his aunt after the show was shut down. He said, "I could not have had a better form of publicity." So he was quite positive at the time. Then the next turning point comes in 1902. He was by then 39 years old, so kind of middle-aged, unsuccessful painter. And in 1902, he's had his first successful exhibition in Berlin, and it was the first time ever he showed the complete set of the paintings in The Frieze of Life, which was one of his most famous series of paintings describing the meaning and cycles of life.
Okay, so it's like perhaps the different episodes from death, birth, love. Seems like that, and it's not too well constrained. It's not like a cycle characterized by very well defined stages, or is it? I mean,
it's quite metaphorical, quite symbolic, and I think he was very excited to be able to show this complete set together because he thinks that, I think it's also to do with Wagner's idea of like this total art, that you really need to have you can only have the full experience with all of this series put together. And it was from that point onwards that Munch started to be recognized as an important artist and an important modern master. And he started to have a lot of shows internationally. I think that he had like 10 shows in a couple of months, something like that. And just for the context, at that time he was 39, and before 1902, he's only had a couple of collectors in Berlin and a couple of collectors back home, and his old teacher back in Oslo, who has always supported him, but the teacher himself was also a very conservative painter, so they had very different ideas. And he's always had very little support and cash and money until that point. So that was the breaking point, 1902 exhibition in Berlin. However, after his success, what comes next? A very toxic...
Downfall? Of course, yeah.
A very toxic period of messy lovers, endless alcohols, smoking a lot, and non-stop traveling, which was not very good for his health and his mental health, physical and mental health. So very soon, in 1908, he totally broke down. He started to have like illusions and visions and everything, and can't move, and I don't know, like all sorts of things.
And what about the women in his life?
The women in his life has always been very toxic. He can go on and on about all of the toxic women in his life. Okay. But we can come to that later.
Okay.
Yes. In 1908, he put himself into a health clinic to treat himself. And after a couple of months, he was feeling well. And in 1909, he left the clinic. And after that, he settled in Oslo and just never really left Norway again. Not really, yeah. Then we come to 1914, when the First World War broke out. The First World War and the Second World War both had quite a significant effect on Munch, actually. After the First World War ended, obviously he still had a lot of popularity in Germany as well as in Paris. But
I would just to interrupt. I mean, I think one thing we've not. I mean, first of all, I think it's surprising that the First World War would affect Munch when, initially the status of Norway in that war was certainly one. I'm obviously not a historian, but it was not among the main parties. And second, I mean, I guess we can get to that also later, but I think he did have a very profound influence on many of the German painters of Die Brücke, the German expressionists.
Yes.
Probably after they saw the show in 1902, because you would think
Yeah.
Kirchner and Schmidt-Rottluff and what have you.
I think they wanted to get him into the group and make him like the founder of the Die Brücke or something, like of the expressionists.
Okay.
But he actually refused to ever meet his fans. And he just didn't want to actually physically be associated with them.
Okay, interesting.
But yeah, even though Norway had not much to do with World War One, but because exactly because that Munch had such a big base in Germany, so a lot of his collectors and buyers were in Germany.
Okay.
And a lot of his paintings were in Germany.
Uh-huh.
And during the war and after the war, a lot of his collectors went bankrupt, so they had to sell their paintings, and also some of them were destroyed during the war. So that didn't go well for him. He's lost a lot of financial support because of that. And then after the war, obviously there was the rise of Nazi and the right wings, and also there's anti-Semitism rising.
But that still took a while. I mean, if you think 1918 and the Nazi Party, I think they came to power in 1933. So you have some 15 years of, probably turmoil.
Yeah, but I think there was obviously there was some. I think there's the feeling of anti-Semitism that's rising throughout the years, and a lot of his. The economy was really bad, in the in-between war period. So, basically, no one had any money in Germany, and no one could buy his art. And while the war was going on, Munch was also unpopular at home because he's always been associated as a German painter in a way.
Yeah.
And everyone in Norway was anti-German, so people didn't really like him at home.
What did the art look like that was championed by Norway, or the kind of the academic style of Norway around that time? I would presume that I would think probably very much inspired by romantic painting and idealized.
Exactly.
Probably also quite realistic. Probably a lot of attention given to technique and.
I think that was probably more like in 1890s and beginning of 19th century. But after he got famous, he was really championed at home. But then during the war, it's kind of tricky because of his association with Germany. Yeah. That's why people didn't really like him. Also in World War II as well, with he was even though his paintings were defined as degenerate art by the Nazi Party, and a lot of them not lost, but a lot of them was dispersed around. But I think for people in Norway at the time, they just didn't care that much about whether his art was degenerate or not. He was just kind of seen as an artist who was really closely associated with Germany, and people didn't like him for that. And in 1940, after Germany took over Norway, then in a way the Nazi Party, I think they wanted to win over the Norwegians' hearts in a way, and so they kind of really championed Munch because he was like the Norwegian artist, and they wanted Munch's support for the party as well. So when Munch died in 1944, the Nazi Party actually had him a really ceremonial state funeral for him, really public one, going down the street, but Munch definitely did not want anything to do with that. But as a result, I think a lot of people in Norway at the time, again, solidified their opinion that Munch was really a Nazi painter. So that was kind of, that's a odd ending to his life, that he had a funeral and where he didn't get to be buried where he wanted to be buried, but. Yeah.
He died in 1944, right?
1944, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So that was before the war ended.
Okay.
80 years old.
It's okay.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. And so, why should we care about him from an, why is he important, and what works are his most important works? I mean, I think, obviously we've touched on a few themes. He was quite avant-garde at the time within the context of Norway, perhaps streams of more romantic and realistic painting, and he was also hugely influential to the artists of Die Brücke, such as Haeckel, Kirchner, Schmidt-Rottluff, and I'm sure I'm missing someone. So, I think he's important because he's influential. He shaped a style that I think is, very elegant and touching through, a quite reduced palette, through limited colors, and quite simplistic brush strokes. I mean, is there anything to add, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think he really had his own philosophy of what painting is and what painting should be and what role painting should have in life, as in that he wanted painting to be something that depict the truth of life, that is larger than just the banality of ordinary things.
And so I guess he wanted to reach the audience and convey something to them, perhaps convey to them what life is about ultimately, or what's the larger thing he's getting at?
Yeah. I think what is life ultimately about, but not in a way as in to describe the meaning of life, but in a way, I think it's describing the experience of life.
Yeah, the emotional intensity, and I presume that's why, many artists today and also people today, relate to his work, in that it's obviously we can. Much of what is depicted is, to me, certainly quite detached. I, didn't grow up in Norway. I did not have a kiss with a girl by a fjord in Norway ever, and nor did my sister. I don't have a sister, so no sister died. But But yet it touches people because it's so emotionally intense. If you think of the scream, in a way it feels quite foreign, but it's also very moving at once, because it's almost like the cliche of a particular human emotion. I mean, if you think of, dread and anxiety and have to give it an image, I think the scream would be one of the images you may choose if you want to give that condition a picture.
Yes, exactly. I think it's kind of a symbolic of an emotion and really condensing all of that experience in this one very iconic image. That's what he does. I think that's what he's really good at.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I guess that also, I feel right now, looking at the art market and also what artists are doing, it seems to me that it's quite popular right now to, rather than having a very conceptually driven practice, to appeal to pathos. I mean, I think Tracy Emin is perhaps, one of her talents, and also Louis Bourgeois. I mean, both of these artists, I think one of their profound talents is, maybe I can't relate to both these artists. I'm a man for one. Maybe, I also don't share their political outlook or what have you.
Can you relate to Munch's? He's a man as well.
But look, I mean, I think what's really great about these artists is that they convey something deeper about human experience in a very touching and profound way. And they're popular now, and so I think within that context, it's only natural that Munch is popular now as well, unlike many of the other many of the other expressionistic painters like Schmidt-Rottluff, Hecke, Kirchner. They're expressionistic, but I wouldn't say their work is that emotionally charged and emblematic, which is also why I think certainly in the last 10 years there's been far greater interest around Munch's oeuvre compared to the artists of Die Brücke or in general expressionism.
Yeah, I think there's a way that you can really relate to it in a very direct way with Munch's work, whereas with other expressionist artists' works, I think it is in a way more theoretical. I feel there's more theory and constraints
perhaps
to it.
Perhaps about how you should paint.
Yeah, how you should paint and what color means what and things like that. But whereas Munch is really personal and it's very kind of a madman's vision.
So going forward, perhaps when thinking about what are his best or most important works, what would you pick? I mean, would it be works that are the most iconic, or that are? Would you go by what touches you most emotionally, or what fascinates you?
I think for many people, I think when you think of Munch, well, first of all, it's the scream. And then it's these images of women. He's painted these not portraits, paintings of female, at her youth, and then when they're older, and it's kind of a cycle of a woman's life. Yeah. And also there's images of the kiss and all of these very sexually charged images. I think that's one thing that people think of. But I think for me, I don't think that's the most. I don't think that's the most brilliant works of Munch, because I feel that his love life is just too much charged with toxic women. Like his view of love is just too tainted by an unusually amount of toxic women in those bohemian lives, and it's kind of like a really one-sided view of what love is.
I get you. I mean, I think you're probably right, but it's obviously narratively compelling. I mean, who likes to read about a healthy, fulfilling relationship of care and understanding? I mean, if we go to the movies and want to watch a film about relationships, it's precisely it's Munch basically. It's some oddball guy with anxiety and whatnot who ends up dating a woman who ends up shooting at him or what have you. But I get your point. Maybe it's
but like in the same vein, like for me, like I feel Louis Bourgeois' way of portraying love and the relationship between man and woman, I think it's a more well-rounded and a deeper way of doing it. Whereas Munch is always like this terrifying woman who's like sucking his blood or something.
So perhaps, I mean, I guess, you know, your criticism would, I presume, be that, I mean, it's really an internal criticism within his frieze cycle. So within the idea of capturing, you know, the important parts of life, he has a quite or ill-conceived view of what life is about. And so rather you'd want to pick a painting of his that touches on a theme that is you know, less ill-conceived.
Yeah, in a way. But I also feel that perhaps, I mean, love is a significant part of his life, but I feel what's really foundational in his life is what death is. I feel that's really shaped who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my favorite is called Death in the Sickroom. It's painted in 1893, and a fairly large painting.
Is that around the time of the Scream, I would imagine? Wasn't that also painted around that?
Yeah,
I mean, at least
around the same.
There are 4 versions of the Scream, I believe, and they're around that time. Yeah,
around the times or around the same time. Yeah, and yeah, so it's a picture in a room with green wallpapers, green wall paintings, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 figures in the painting, and this is the whole big family of Munch. Mm-hmm. So the painting depicts the moment when his sister died. His sister Sophie, when she died when she was 15.
And how old was Munch?
Munch, I think he was 1 year younger, something like that. They're like 1 or 2 years apart. So Sophie was his mother died when he was 5. So Sophie was at the time maybe 6 or something like that. And they were really close as siblings, because after the mother died, Sophie was really the only sibling to him. Christian, the father, was kind of abusive and an alcoholic, kind of, despite being very religious. His aunt was a motherly figure, but never really the mother, because they just never really felt that close with her. And then they took care of the younger kids. So Sophie was really the family for him. And so in this painting, Sophie is sitting in the chair, with the back of chair facing us in the background. And next to her, there's the father, Munch's father, standing next to her praying. He's always depicted his father praying in his paintings, because I think that's one of the things that he really remembers of his father, always praying, and especially when he's ill. His mother was ill, when his sister was ill, he always prayed, but it never worked for him. And next, behind Sophie, there's Aunt Karen, who's really standing there very caringly for her. In the foreground, there's the first person is sitting on a chair, bowing down her head. That's his younger sister, Laura. So behind Laura, there's Ingrid, who's the only person who's actually staring at us, facing us, in a kind of purple spotty black dress. And behind Ingrid, there's Munch. He's kind of only has his head out, coming out that we can see, and he's sort of facing Sophie, but with the back of his head facing us. Mm-hmm. And behind Munch, there's a bed where Sophie was lying about maybe 5 minutes ago before this scene, but now she's sitting on a chair. And then behind all of them, on the left side of the painting, there's Andreas, the younger brother of Munch, who's kind of leaving the room. I think for me, this painting is very interesting in a way that it's interesting way of painting what death is. I think in a lot of in Western traditions, or in a lot of traditions, like Giotto's paintings of like the death of Christ or something. It's always this figure who's dying in the middle, and who's centered in the painting, and you have a group of people surrounding them, sort of crying and showing their remorse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the traditional way of expressing death. But here it's this Sophie who is dying is sitting in the background in the chair, and you have this group of family who kind of feel there is care in there, but they're very dispersed in the room. They're not really talking to each other. They're all really indulging their own emotions.
Yeah.
And there's this detachment also within the family.
Yeah.
You see Andreas leaving, and then you see Laura, who's going to have a lot of, or at that time in 1893, who's already have a lot of mental issues, and she went crazy for the rest of her life, basically.
Yeah.
And Ingrid was actually the only person who was the real support of the family. She kept the income coming with her piano lessons and things like that. So she was the pillar of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And Munch, I don't know what he's doing here, but it just kind of feels like there is a detachment here. He kind of feels maybe it's shame, or maybe it's, I don't know what it is. And I just feel...
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to, when thinking about to portray death less through, this kind of egomaniacal perspective of, the suffering of the victims, and, more thinking about how it perhaps changes relationships in the long term without, I'd say suffering, both of the person who dies and the people within the moment who, may cry perhaps, to focus on the more long-term family relationships, and how, in this scenario, what we see is, obviously the majority of the family is very much overwhelmed, and how they're perhaps not sticking together as much as they should, and how there's only one figure, namely Ingrid, who can look beyond and maintain a clear head, because ultimately, with any death, I would think, suffering and agony, it has its justification, and it's important to express feelings, but what do you do after that?
I think one thing that's also interesting is that the reason why Sophie is in this chair is because that was her last request. That she said she didn't want to lie in the bed anymore. She wanted to sit in this specific chair. So that's when she stood up and moved to the chair, and then she died on this chair. And I think Munch also kept this chair for the rest of his life. And I think that it's like a significant moment for him also, that she really wanted to live. She really did not want to die. I think, she was kind of looking towards the future as well in that moment. Well, of course, I think, his painting is a representation of all sorts of different times that's combined together, but in association to this theme. Yeah.
Good. I mean, perhaps I move on to my favorite work. I have to admit, when you badmouth the cliche themes such as the scream, the kiss, and anxiety and whatnot.
I didn't badmouth the scream. I just badmouthed the
kissing, the toxic women. I, as a guy, obviously immediately fell for the toxic women. But so I'm a bit in the corner now. Well, in fact, what I wanted to discuss is I've been tremendously fascinated by Munch's prints. So my understanding is when he went to Berlin in the early 1890s, he created a lot of controversy, but as a prudent businessman, he also looked at how he can create multiples, as it were, just like Andy Warhol or other artists might have done in the 20th century. Munch was concerned with multiples, and so he worked incredibly creatively, incredibly innovatively with lithographs, drypoint, and my favorite of all, his woodcuts. And they were, he would often combine different methods using woodcut, using drypoint in a single work. And he would also, typically when you do a woodcut and you have several colors, you cut the wood with a pattern for the blueprint, and then you have another piece of wood you cut appropriately, say for the red print, and then you have the blue and print it on paper, and then you have the red and print it on paper. But Munch was, he would create like those grids where he could have smaller wood blocks, like elements, and combine them together so that he could color one part in red and another one in blue. And he was just extremely messy. Sometimes he also just painted a single wood block, one corner red, the other one blue, and then in the middle there'd be a mixing of color.
I think, did he like kind of color one block in different colors?
Exactly.
Like, at the same time?
I mean, he did that. It was incredibly experimental.
Yeah, so it kind of had, you see the color mixing like on the wood block
in parts. So you see it mixing, but as I said, he would also have like these puzzles composed out of several parts, which prevents the mixing because you still have like separate elements, as it were. And I think these works are immensely innovative. I think they're perhaps the nicest woodblock prints there are. Incredibly sophisticated, often with this grain of the wood in the composition, varying it a lot. De facto, each one of these prints is a unique work because he experimented with these images. And I think, aside from being fascinated by the medium and his experimentation, I think it's a very important part of his oeuvre because I think, we spoke about the frieze of life and how there are certain themes he cares about, right?
Yeah.
And so he tended to repeat motifs throughout his career. So he paints a painting in 1885 of, Love is Kissing, and then he'd revisit that in 1890, and then in 1914 and 1930 or what have you.
And he would also do that in his prints. His prints also conceives of the same themes and subject matter. And he would change them quite drastically at times. He would keep the wood plates, sometimes adding more details to it, using different colors. And so I think it's perhaps... Print is a more successful medium than painting if your work is at its core around, adapting and revisiting certain themes in your oeuvre. Interesting.
You can have more variations, you can experiment more rather than having to start again from scratch with a painting. And so I think that's what I find so fascinating. The sheer amount of variation with, those different techniques, combining them, messing them up in the sense of doing what you're not supposed to do, but obviously to very masterfully. So, and of the prints, I was initially inclined to say The Kiss. There's a wonderful drypoint one of a woman and man kissing, but the man is a skeleton. So you see, the torso, the skeleton, and how he embraces the woman.
Would you like to just briefly explain what drypoint is?
So drypoint, it's, to not sound too pretentious, it's an intaglio print technique. So basically, you typically use a copper plate. I mean, can have various metals, and then you use a needle to scratch by hand into the copper plate, and then you cover it in a layer of ink, and then you have the ink go into the indentations left by the scratches, and then you press the paper and the copper plate very tightly together so that the paper is in a way forced to go into the incisions of the copper plate to get out the ink. And it's a bit different to etching, where you would basically have the lines in the copper plate. You basically create them through acid burning into the copper plate. I don't want to go into too much detail. It's a really fascinating topic, I think, etchings and the various methods. But yeah, going back to the image, I just considered it a very powerful image because it combines both love, romance, and death, perhaps, alluding to, Munch's ill-conceived idea of love, of, perhaps the woman in your life, sucking out your life energy. But, I felt now maybe I would have to distance myself from that work, given what Shuchi said, that it's an ill-conceived.
But I guess it's also like the skeleton is a consisting subject matter in his work as well. He had his self-portrait print where there's the bust of himself, and then there's the skeleton
with
sort
the skeleton
of arm,
and
it's a lot of memento mori and all of that.
But the skeleton is actually, it's more present in his early works, actually. So if you...
Is it? Okay.
So, I think with the skeleton arm, I forgot the name of that, probably self-portrait. I think that's from the 1890s, the drypoint. I just spoke about a very early version of the kiss. It's from 1894 or 5, I believe.
I mean, I think later in his life, he just kind of, let's say, went a bit soft.
I'd say so. I mean, I think probably the influence of Matisse is significant to mention, and the Fauve artists. So, in his paintings, but also in his wood blocks, he uses far more color. I don't think it's worse, but it's just I think maybe a more...
Yeah, I think he tried to reinvent himself several times, like when he was in the clinic and trying different techniques of painting and as well. But I think his subject matter as well, it's not as sort of vivid as what it used to be. It became like there's these portraits of wealthy men, and then there's these like snow scenes, and it's all quite
I don't really like the snow scenes. I mean, they just seem... I mean, I think many artists... I mean, I think that's pretty much after the First World War that he it's almost quite kitsch. It's like a very
I mean, he's just his gigantic
portrayal of farmers, of farm work, and it really... I mean, I think that the late woodcuts are still very good, because I think the imagery there is more traditional. So it's often couple in front of the water, in front of the forest, and I think the color palette is just far more rich than in his earlier works. But I think his late paintings, they just feel quite pleasant, or as if he's trying to be pleasing, particularly also toward the ordinary person. So I think in terms of painting, probably up to the First World War, at latest probably up to 1910. I wouldn't want to go further.
I think his last great work is probably more like the Aula paintings, the sun. I think that was a good imagery.
That was 1905 or 1902?
I mean the actual so it's a design for one of the wall
the main
paintings.
hall in the university.
It's a frieze. So I think the actual project is finished in 1916 or something like that. But the idea is conceived in 1909. Yeah.
But I mean, if I can defend the woodcuts, I think the later ones are still very good because the themes are still, I think, really what we like about Munch. But the colors are just, and I think his mastery of the woodcut technique, combining more compositional elements, more colors and whatsoever. I think he's a bit more confident with his technique,
Yes, in the topic of experimentation, not only with prints, he's actually experimented a lot with photography as well in the early days. So he bought his first camera in 1902, and one of his most famous portfolios is called the Fatal Destiny portfolio, which was from 1902 to 1908, a series of photographs. I think it's quite interesting with his photographs that he would sort of expose the film several times on the same film, so that you'd see like a ghostly figure of himself sort of walking on the beach or walking amongst his own paintings, like this ghost that's...
When did he start experimenting with photography?
1902, when he bought his first camera.
That's really early because, I think, double image exposure, these are things... many of the artists associated with the Bauhaus, they also used photograms, Man Ray, but that was the 1930s or 1920s.
Yeah,
so it's quite curious.
I think for Munch, one of the thing about photography is also the spiritual side. I mean, at the time, like end of 19th century, there's this huge wave of having a medium, you know, and all of this connection with the death. And then on photography, there's this thing that when it's falsely exposed, you'd see like a ghostly figure often, and they would often think that this is like some spirits coming or things like that. I think that's also part of it.
Interesting.
But it's kind of interesting that he's photographed himself as this really ghostly figure.
And did he treat it or consider it as an art form or as part of his art? I mean, you mentioned earlier that he cared about the Gesamtkunstwerk. So
the what? Oh, the total art form.
Yeah. So would that be something he would,
I think,
consider as art, display with his paintings, or how does that fall in?
Well, one thing he used it for is to use it as an advertising sort of thing to show his collectors what this painting or whatever looks like.
Sure.
And the other,
like the double image exposure, for instance.
Yeah, I would think that it is probably part of his art. For one thing, that he named his album called Fatal Destiny, which sounds like a proper thing.
Sure.
And he's taken a lot of self-portraits with it, especially with his own art together with him. It's kind of interesting, like taking your self-portrait with your own art.
Sure. I mean, why would you do that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of interesting to just ponder about.
Yeah. Interesting.
And he'll sometimes print an image and sort of draw on it and just reprint several images like at different scales and things like that.
Would he also paint on photographs?
Yeah, he, like not really paint, but like sketches. Like he would sketches like dog and trees and things like that. Cute. Yeah, it's quite cute. It's kind of an interesting album to just go through and just flip through to see what life was like and what it was like experimenting with camera at the time. So, yes, thank you for listening to us. And
next one is Willem de Kooning.
Yes, next one will be Willem de Kooning.